I would say it's the most important decision of their life. And someone said to me on Facebook, more important than who you marry? I said, yes, because many dentists have more than one wife, but very few times just one practice.
Hey, ambitious dentist, welcome to Start Your Dental Practice, the show for existing and aspiring dentists to take your dental practice to the highest possible level. I'm your host, Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV, founder of dentistmetrics.com. Every episode, we aim to demystify the how to start a dental practice problem by bringing on world-class dentists, influencers, and consultants in the dental industry to pick their brain about how to get past the barriers involved from going from no practice to being a practice owner to owning your own successful dental practice. Hello, ambitious dentists. Today, I have with us someone that I've really wanted to have on the podcast for really more than 6 months, less than 2 years, because I think that's whenever I first ran into him. And his first time I ran into him, I was like, hey, this guy's doing some stuff that I really like. He's being very helpful to a lot of people, which I really like. And he's doing it out of trying to be helpful to the dental community, which is something I really like. Someone who has devoted, over 100 hours to putting out free podcasts for people. That's something that I have a high level of respect for and greatly appreciate. And you can always kind of tell whenever you see somebody answering questions for people and they're doing it without a ulterior motive of some type. And so today's guest is Dr. Paul Goodman, the Dental Nacho himself. If you're not familiar with Dr. Paul, he has a Facebook group. You could call it a group. I guess you might be able to call it a cult too.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, it's called the Dental Nachos on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook and you're a dentist and you like nachos, there's a group that was made for you. But in all seriousness, the Dental Nachos has some really fantastic content with a lot of really good members that are very active. They have a lot of really good things to say about the business of dentistry, and can really answer a lot of questions. And it's the shining piece of that whole group is Dr. Paul himself. And so Dr. Paul is a practicing dentist. He is someone who has served as a broker for dental practices and assisting people, purchasing practices. He also acts as a coach for people that are buying dental practices, which is crazy to me that there's not that isn't more of a thing. Like there's not more people that do that because there's such a need for it. And I know that there's hundreds of dentists that are listening right now thinking, yeah, I'd really like somebody that could coach me through the purchasing of a dental practice. And that's what Dr. Paul is doing now. I think he's going to do really well with it and help a lot of people out with it. So anyway, Dr. Paul, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this. I really like the content that you put out on the different groups. You seem to just share in a bunch of different groups, which I think is important because not everybody's in the same group. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I listed off all the different things that you're doing inside of the dental space. The first thing that I noticed was the Dental Nachos. And how did the Dental Nachos come about? 'Cause I can't ask without.
It's a great the origin story. I mean, I really do love nachos. A lot of my guidance comes from my experience in the restaurant industry as a server for 12 years. I worked at a diner, corporate Mexican place, and some fine dining. In the corporate Mexican place, where I learned a lot of systems I use in my dental practice, from manuals, holding people accountable. They would give you just free nachos all when you were there. And I'm 40 now, but when I had 19-year-old metabolism, I could eat as many nachos as I wanted to. And I also love that when you went to a Mexican restaurant, they would just give you the nachos when you sat down, so you didn't have to wait for any food. So that's really where it came from. But I came up with the Facebook group name because nachos are a combination of a lot of things. I do these different things: dentist, broker, coach, speaker. And I thought it would just be a good representation of me. And I thought a few hundred people would join, and we could talk about implant cases and practice management. And then as this Facebook group world has exploded, and I think really just a great way, it's up to 9,000 members, which is not one of the biggest groups, but it's a medium-sized group. And I've enjoyed moderating it. It's taught me a lot about dentists, and it's try to make it like a dentist playground where people try to play nicely. My wife was just here. She was a kindergarten teacher, so I feel like her sometimes. Say, hey, could you talk nicely to this other person behind the scenes? And, I think one thing I could tell your listeners, if you don't moderate a Facebook group, you get a lot of messages from behind the scenes that people never know about, either, complaining about someone in the group, saying something, and it takes a lot of energy to do it. I love it, but maybe just my message, be nice to the Facebook moderators, the groups you're in, because it's not that easy.
No kidding. Yeah, people like to pretend that it would be easy, but as soon as you, like, I have a Facebook group for my podcast, and I had all these ambitions of doing all these different things with it. And like literally like 2 weeks ago, somebody posted like, is anybody even in this group anymore? Like there's over 1,000 people in it. And it's just like, I just don't have time to, to manage it in addition to all the other things that I do. So yeah, much respect for keeping me up with all that. So,
sure.
So what moved you from, where you are as a practicing dentist, as a multi-practice owner, I believe,
Yes.
to being, helping with transitions and being a broker and now being a coach as well? How did that all come about?
What's interesting is, and there's I love stand-up comedy, and this always happens with stand-up comedians, they become well known and people think they're new, but they really have been a stand-up comedian for like a decade. So I am not new at all. It's just that I was doing all of this in Philadelphia where I live, and I'm sitting here right now. And everyone knew me in Philadelphia, dentist-wise, right? Prior to Facebook, think of a world without Facebook. I was like doing study club by sending out emails and actual real letters. Crazy. I mean, there was no Facebook group back then. So I was, this person in the Philadelphia area who was connecting people with jobs. I started this thing called the Rising Dentist Study Club in 2005. And I'm not a specialist, but I did a general practice residency, a chief residency, and a fellowship at Albert Einstein in Philadelphia, where I learned a lot about implants. So there's no such thing as a specialist for implants, but I had a really unique opportunity to learn a lot when I was young. And I said, I want dentists to collaborate, be nice to each other. And it really was a genuine idea. I said, maybe if I have this study club, when dentists are young, they'll be nicer to each other when they're older. And this was way before Dental Nachos. So I'd have these groups in Philadelphia, and people liked it. I got sponsors. I get people to donate their time to speak. I'd have one big speaking event where I've had people like Mike Totola, Steve Rasner. We had Josh Austin last year. But the Facebook world, I think because I talk a lot, I was voted most talkative in high school. And I'm always giving my opinion. I try to do it I call myself like a kind disruptor, right? Our Dental Nachos rules is you can attack ideas and not people. So, you should be willing to have your ideas, attacked, so to speak, or at least talk about, but it shouldn't be turned into the dentist way of, well, that's like the worst crown prep I've ever seen in my life. You're a terrible dentist. That's what I try to avoid having happen. But Facebook has just allowed it to spread out really all over the world. And I think it's really just awesome that dentists can communicate this way and learn from each other. And I was on Dental Town for many years. Were you on Dental Town too?
Oh, yeah. I'm still a member. I just don't. I can only handle so much dental content every day.
Yeah. I still go back to Dental Town occasionally, and I love Dental Town. I always used to be in the magazines when they would pick I was always this disruptive guy, I was doing it a kind way. I remember one time they put in Dental Town, I said, why don't you put a periodontist in your office to place implants? I kind of say these things in a disruptive way, and people start talking. I'm never going to not refer to my favorite periodontist, or I'd like to do that. But Dental Town didn't have your face like Facebook, so there was kind of some meanness to it, and people could hide behind, Nacho Guy 123 anonymous area. And what I think has happened with Facebook is just you can't be anonymous, and I think it's changed the vibe to some degree. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's just a different vibe when it's your Facebook profile hooked up to this comment being said.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what is the current environment then from, if you've been doing it since 2005, what has been the environment of the acquisition world or the transition world from then to now? What's that?
It's a great question. And it's a lot different. I was just saying today, it's changing, moment by moment. I was fortunate enough to practice with my dad. My brother's there with me now. My dad unfortunately passed away, but we have associates. We have a second location we brought in 2011. So we have 2 dental practices about 5 miles apart. Think of it as a giant ship with a tiny ship next to it, right? So our main practice, one of my messages to your leaders, to your listeners on big and take home points is, and a lot of this e-miss stuff too, just make sure your first dental practice runs well. Because, I will go to dental students, which I love, and there'll be 100 of them sitting there as a pen, And I'll say, who wants to own, more than one practice? And all these people raise their hand. I say, well, you should try owning one practice first. And I kind of say like this, and I know this happens to people, who would want 5 children at the exact same time, right? It would kind of blow up your life. So the acquisition world, though, when my friends were looking at practices between 2006 and 2010, there was just a lot of great choices. I mean, there weren't as many things with DSOs in corporate dentistry. I think the dentists that were retiring were doing it at a slightly younger age, and they seemed to just have a lot of choices for a practice, let's say doing it $800,000 a year or more, 5 operatory practice, keep the guy on for a year, very traditional stuff. And a lot of my friends own practices were 40 like that now. Whereas now as a broker, I sometimes see these big practices, 1.5 million or above. Not a lot of those, by the way. And then I see a lot of practices under $500,000 because dentists have worked till their 70s. They're right. I mean, they're right to do so, but they don't understand when they say, why wouldn't a young dentist want to take this over? And I say, it's not because of you, or it's not because of your practice out, because they can't afford a life like that with school loans, practice debt, as an accountant. And I always say to the older dentist, you don't have any debt. So if you work 3.5 days a week, make $165,000 a year at the age of 70, it's a much different life than someone who's 30 who needs to take over. So there's an interesting shift, I think, where smaller practices are becoming very difficult to sell. And a lot of the larger practices are going to the corporate buyers before anyone else gets a real chance at them. So there's a bit of a lack of, I don't know, what do you see with your clients? I mean, that's what I'm seeing here in the Northeast.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we have, since we have people all over the country, I get to see a lot of different shades of the same thing. And, what we see, I see so many people right now chasing down smaller practices because that's all that's available. And they say, I've been looking forever. This is the first one I found that looks good to me. And, it's small, but I think I can maybe turn it around and things like that. And I'm just like, that's a tough molehill to climb because, we've got 125 practices we help out right now as a CPA firm. And we've got, I probably talk to, I don't know, a dozen people a week about buying practices or something like that. Or I hear stories about it or something in that regard. And I can tell you there's the whole, 1% of dentists that fail. To me, the riskiest investment you'll make as a dentist if you're buying a practice would be to buy a small practice and try to turn it around without some very, very specific elements of that practice being in a very, favorable, setting. So like, having like a ton of patients.
I agree with you completely. A couple things I could tell your listeners, and I mean, I call myself a medium-age dentist because I'm 40. I'm not old. I'm not young.
I hope guy not old.
yeah, right. So medium age, though, medium age. So, but if I'm talking to students, I'm old. If I'm talking to a seller, who's 73, he thinks I'm a young kid. But what I would tell dentists is the guy, and most of them are men at this age in their 70s as dentists. We will have more female owners. There are going to be some now, but the selling dentists, they're a better dentist than you think, and they're doing a better job than you think. So they think, oh, this guy has a 4 operatory practice, only doing $500,000 a year. I'm going to turn it into $1 million practice. Like you said, that's very difficult to do. It's not an effort problem. It's a math problem, right? How many patients are in the practice? What's the culture of that practice? What type of dentistry can you do? So, I mean, I agree completely that it's not the same with kids because they don't come in like different sizes per se. But my one good friend says this, running a $600,000 practice and $1 million practice is probably the same amount of headaches. Mm-hmm. So you might as well have the $1 million practice. So what's happening now though is we just have a lack. Like I do this buyer coaching, which I love, where people bring me different practices, and I can tell these dentists want to buy a practice so bad. They're trying to make it fit this round, square peg round hole thing. But I tell them, when you don't own a practice, you're flexible. You can move to another part of the country. You can get another job somewhere. The second you say, I'm going to own this practice in Tuna, PA, I'm just an example, that's where you're going to be for 30 years. And I always use this joke. I did it at the Mark Costas Dental Success when it went well. It's like, it's like having a practice, like having a child, and you're not allowed to return either of them, right? So you can't just like return a practice or a child if you don't like it. So
It's 100% true. It's 100% true. So whenever you're analyzing practices and helping people, transition into practices, what are some of the most common areas that you find buyers aren't focusing on? Like, to me, everybody talks about price. Like that's usually what they focus in on first. But after that, like, what are some of the areas that people should be looking at when they're looking at, looking at a potential practice opportunity?
Well, I think, I say this to Rob Montgomery, and I say this to you and Jamie as well. I wish there was an opportunity for you to go to dentist fantasy camp where you could do a filling on somebody. And you could say, man, that is pretty hard to do a filling in someone's mouth. But you guys are not dentists, you help dentists, but I am a dentist. And we were taught in millimeters, we were taught with test scores, we were taught with all these numbers. So my catchphrase is practice acquisitions are about people and not numbers. But the dentists think they're about numbers. So they think if they get the right number practice, it's going to solve their problem. But it's really, they need to be able to evaluate the people. Who are the people? Of course, it's the selling dentist. It's the team the selling dentists have. And the other people are the patients that are in that practice. And those are the things that a lot of times buyers don't understand. It's very complex. Are they going to be able to replicate all the procedures that the selling dentist does? They may love doing ortho. I mean, they may say, I'm going to come in and do ortho, but is that practice one where that's going to be a good adjunctive thing? I mean, you may know that I'm very into implants. That's what I learned. I find it to be something that can really, be more production in the same amount of hours. A lot of people need it. But if I was going to buy a practice in Center City, Philadelphia, outside here, from a 50-year-old dentist, and he has a bunch of us as patients, it's not going to be a huge implant practice. You need to practice with a lot of older people. And those are the things that dentists need to really dig into, because I would say it's the most important decision of their life. And someone said to me on Facebook, more important than who you marry? I said, yes, because many dentists have more than one wife, but very few times just one practice. And, could be the other way. Could be, many female dentists have more than one husband, because it's easier to disengage yourself from a marriage than a practice. And you probably see that, Jonathan, with your partnership challenges that happen, or somebody who wants to move. So I think it's just so important to make sure the people part fits with the number part.
Speaking of the people and, the seller versus the buyer, one of the things that I find really interesting about the space is that, myself, I didn't have a minor in math. I was like 2 hours away from having a minor in math. Really loved math growing up. And I was actually going to be a math professor before I decided to become a CPA. That's kind of when I abandoned it. But I had, all the calculuses, discrete math, and all these other types of things to be able to look at math and equations and things like that. That's just how my head works. And so whenever I got into this industry, I kind of thought, like, okay, you can math these things out. You can do a formula. We use these algorithms. We can use, if we could do if then, if this is like this, then this should be like this, all these other types of things. I found out very quickly that a lot of the times what ends up happening is a lot of it comes down to the treatment philosophy of the two dentists. Like how in line are those two pieces? And like, for as an example of that, you'll see one dentist that's selling that's been is a fantastic case presenter, and they do tons of crowns every month. And I got a new guy coming in that's a year out of school, and he's not ever had to, he is only doing like 10 crowns a month at his current location, whereas he's going to come into a new practice and try to sell 40 or 50 a month. So how much is that an element of buying a practice, or is that something that a transition coach can help you with?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this because I talk about with the people buying a practice, like, how are they going to communicate with these patients who've been used to seeing a dentist for 30 years and knows them and knows them out? There's just a certain element of trust. There's a certain element of familiarity that's hard to mimic. And a lot of times associates now are in places where a lot of their work is if I say handed to them, then the associates are going to revolt and say it's not handed to me. However, they're like the aunts and uncles of the practice, where they come in and a lot of things are taken care of. And now they have to develop all these systems themselves. So one of the things I think is great is if the seller can stay on in a capacity and help. But as you know, a lot of times there's not enough money for the seller to do that. And that, I think, is the change in 2018 versus 1998. 1998, I think a lot of times the older dentist could stay on a day or two a week, say, hey, Jonathan, this is, hey, Paul, this is Mrs. Smith. I've known her for years. You could transfer the goodwill in physical ways. Now it's sort of like, hey, you're done, I'm coming. A lot of times the sellers have worked and worked and worked. They're just ready to be done, right? I mean, even if you ask them to stay, they don't want to stay, right? Like, it's so, I think the transition space is just changing where the sellers are, I mean, maybe you would see this, I think their average age is definitely older than it's been. And they're ready to go to Arizona sometimes the day after the practice is closed and play golf, and be done. And the young dentist is left with it. And the team, we talk about the team, that's a very difficult time too, because you haven't had a chance to meet them and talk with them, but now they're going to help you be a dentist. And it's not an easy transition for the team either.
Yeah, I think the last thing I read was that the retirement age went from like 63 to like 68, like in a matter of like 2 or 3 years. And so if the dentists are retiring later in life, they're a lot less likely to be able to stay on afterwards. So
yeah, and that's a big difference in life. I mean, if 60-year-olds and 68-year-olds, 63 and 68 is two very different ages. And I think for someone who's working, right, you could still be physically fit or active, but I mean, I think by the time you get above 65, you just kind of want to be done working. And I think that's one of the challenges. And, you might have a lot of the young associates are coming from corporate environments, whether you think that's great or terrible or in the middle, it's just totally different than the private practice environment. So they haven't really even been in the system or been in the restaurant that they're going to take over. So that's another challenge. That's why I love buyer coaching. What we really need is beyond just someone like me or you to help them analyze to get to closing. I know with Ideal Practices, they help people open their practice, right? Startups. I was saying to Jamie and Stephen, we need somebody like a consultant to help for the first 90 days of an acquisition. Usually like first 90 days of having your child. Someone who might be there physically for a lot of times and say, hey, I'm here for you, because that is very difficult. In a lot of ways, I find a startup to be easier with that because you put your own imprint, like Jamie says, on it, your own culture, and also you're not very busy. I mean, you might, Jamie and Stephen and all those people, they do a great job getting the practice started, but sometimes you do an acquisition, you step into it, it's a very busy practice.
Oh yeah. And
so there's no time to get to know people sometimes.
It's true. And sometimes you step in and you feel busy and you're not making any money. So.
Yeah, right. Well, it was funny. You just said that being busy has nothing to do with being productive. I mean, especially as a general dentist or even as a restaurant server, the days where you're very tired at the end of the day are usually not your most productive days. And then when the other times when you think, oh, today was fairly simple, you somehow produce a lot of money. And usually that's because of implants. Because implants, that's my message out there. Restoring implants will save your back, because a lot of that dentistry people do is very, very labor and physically intensive. So, that's why implants can not only be a productive thing, it can be a somewhat back relaxing thing for a general dentist.
Yep. So, I've always found the dental industry to be this, whenever I'm talking to my non-dental friends, the few that I have, and they're like, well, what do people come to you for help for? And I'm like, look, the industry is getting more competitive. These guys, these guys and girls are, in their, late 20s, sometimes early 30s, mid 30s, sometimes a little bit older than that. And they've gone to school. What I say is that they've had about 15,000 hours of learning how to become a dentist.
Yeah.
0 hours learning how to become a business owner. And they get out of school. They've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. They probably have a small family. They might own a house. They've got, more debt there, and say like a $300,000 house, something like that. In Arkansas, that's a fairly good sized house. I don't know how big how good that is. We're in wherever our listeners are listening from, but they've got 300 in school loans or up to $1 million, which everybody saw that Forbes article recently about that.
Yeah.
But let's say 400,000 and then 300,000 for a house. And they've got $700,000 in debt, and then they got to go to maybe buy a practice or start a practice or whatever it is they're going to do. And if they do end up buying the practice, say they buy a $750,000 practice, they're up to almost $1.5 million in debt. They don't own the practice yet, but they now own the practice, but they've never owned a business before. And
I mean, that's the part that, I like to challenge anyone. And if people are my friends and family members, I am one of those people who I can care about you a lot. It doesn't change how I care about you, but I will challenge you. And it could be my own wife, my own brother, it could be my own friends, because they know this about me. And I do this when you do this on Facebook, it's hard because people don't know you in person. But I really challenge the dental schools. I mean, they're charging these young students a lot of money, and they're not training them in things they need to know. I say it's like, if you're going to be a parent, it'd be like they train them in how to like knit their own children's clothes or make, swaddling techniques, but they never teach them how to feed the baby, which is business. And that's why these dentists, it's actually counterintuitive. Everything you've learned to be a good dentist, none of that helps being a good business person. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it actually kind of hurts, because one of my one guy who's Rob was introduced to, John Masusek, who's he runs your dental COO. He's not a dentist, but he consults with dentists, and he had me read this book, Golf is Not a Game of Perfect, and it really is good. I play golf. It's an excellent book. And that's business. Not anything's perfect, but dentists think everything has to be perfect with their care. They turn it to their business, and it becomes just overwhelming. So I think these schools have to incorporate this type of training. And when I talk about business training, it's more than just business. It's leadership, it's management, it's decision making. It's not just business where, okay, should I buy this supply because it's cheaper than the other supply? These decisions are much more complex in business. Relationships, how many times, think about this, Jonathan, and I think I love my team. I really do. I've known many of them for years. But how many times is somebody who went to school for a lot of times 8 to 12 years after high school, communicating with high school grads every day in their dental team? They're two different lives. How can those two people talk to each other? It's not easy, or understand each other. And that doesn't happen. And I can't think of any other industry where that happens.
Yeah, it's really complex. All the different elements of getting into this business and trying to figure out what to do. And it's really cool that there's so much content out there right now. Like, believe me, I produce it, so I get it. Yeah. But I mean, I gotta think it's really overwhelming for a lot of people out there to have. It's almost like there's so much information now. It went from being like, the only way to be able to get this information was to pay some guy that you saw an internet ad on, or like saw an infomercial late at night on for, $10 grand to get this information. And now all that's free. But what's
interesting though is
go ahead.
I totally agree with it. And the amount of content's great. However, I tell dentists, like, you were going to run a marathon for fun. Ask other people who run marathons who are your friends. Maybe they ran a 4 hour 37 for training. You might not get hurt in doing that because your friend finished in 4:30 and you're going to go out and finish in 4:30. If your financial future depended on you doing a 3.5 hour marathon, you could take all that free content, but at the end of the day, you also have to pay some good advisors and coaches who do this professionally, because it drives me nuts. I mean, I created some of it. Someone goes on all these dental Facebook groups, you might say, you think I should buy this practice? And then there's all these random questions. And I just go on and say, hey, this is great conversation, but you should really connect with the Jonathan Van Horn or Rob Montgomery, somebody, to get some really good advice about this, because just what your friends say, they could have gotten lucky. A lot of times people get lucky, right? I never had a problem with my practice. The seller was great, but there's other stories of a seller doing something subversive. So I think that free content is awesome for awareness, but I tell dentists, like, don't be dentist cheap. That's my motto, right?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's, and that's kind of the point I was getting at, was that it's almost dangerous that there's so much content now, because, like, I'll have someone that I'll be talking to and they'll be like, yeah, I think I'm just going to do my own accounting because I've heard a lot about it, and I've heard you speak about it, I've heard you teach about it, and all these other things. I was like, that wasn't the point. Like, that's not.
Dentists don't. I mean, I'd love to get them all in a room, and I had this really cool opportunity to speak this summer at a big event, and the guy said, can you speak on Dental Nachos? So I'm going to put together my own presentation. I think a lot of it's going to be on dentist decision making, because the most successful people on the planet, the LeBron James and these people, they themselves have multiple coaches telling them how to be better at the thing that they're already the best at, right? So it's like, you should use that and say, maybe I shouldn't do my own bookkeeping, because here's why. You only have a certain amount to use. Use it towards patients and other stuff. When people say, oh, I could figure it out. Of course you could figure it out, but it's not what you do every day.
Yeah, it's like, you wouldn't, this is a crude analogy, but I mean, you wouldn't want a patient to be able to figure out how to do an extraction, like,
Right, yeah. Yeah, we've seen that. We've seen on a Castaway, we tried to take out the tooth with his ice skate and left the root in. So yes, I mean, people learn what to do in a special manner. What's crazy is, like, I'll say, I use a lot of examples, like, I don't want to pay XYZ because I could figure it out. I'm like, oh, do you also, I'll say this to a 31-year-old female, cut my own hair because you could figure that out too. And they say, oh, I would never cut my own hair. So I try to use that as an example to show them how funny, how foolish they're being about trying to figure out something that, in a lot of times in practice, it's a make or break thing. It can ruin your financial life.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's circle back to the transitions and purchasing of a practice. In terms of, looking for a practice to be able to purchase, like, what are some of the things that you spot in practices that say to you, this is a good value, or that this is a good opportunity for someone to be able to purchase?
Great question. A couple of things that, I was doing a poll on which would be an easy practice to sell. So the more ops, the better. So if you're a solo practitioner, as a general dentistry has got out of control. I mean, I always say it's like running a diner. You're doing so many different procedures, and you go to a diner with your friends kind of drunk at 2 a.m., and someone orders grilled cheese, and the next person orders salmon franchise. The diner makes both of those items. To me, that's nuts, and that's what a general dentist does. Denture adjustments, fillings, you want to see a kid, and then you're the town guy for problems. Somebody needs their, this tooth's bothering me. So you need ops to put human beings in. So 4+ ops, and more ops, the better. There's no such thing for a general dentist having too many ops. Secondly, a revenue amount, and this may change, if I say $700,000 a year, in New York City, that's different than Arkansas. It's different than, Plymouth meeting PA, but some sort of revenue amount where you're going to make a substantial income if you just do exactly what that other dentist did. So you want to say, for the first year, if I just do exactly what this dentist does, I'm going to be able to pay my loan, pay my student loan, live with my family. So first, number of ops, a reasonable income from that practice. Other aspects of the practice are, if there's an opportunity to add something that you do that the seller doesn't. So for example, if you do like to place implants or extractions, and there's a nice 70-year-old and he refers them all out, you know that, hey, you can capture some of that. You don't have to do all of it. But if the seller is doing all their own molar endo and all their own extraction and placing all their own implants, that's not an easy practice to take over. I was just doing a buyer coach for a supervisor dentist where like 10% of the practice was ortho. And I said, do you do any ortho? And she said, no. I said, it's going to be a huge problem. She goes, I'd like to learn. I said, by the time you learn, you're going to already miss like 2 or 3 years of that 10% of the income. So those would be the things: ops, procedures, reasonable amount of revenue, like $700,000.
What about as far as like the quantity of patients? Like, have you ever read a valuation that had an accurate portrayal of active patients?
Yeah, that's funny. I try. To me, active patients is not that big a deal to me, whether I'm purchasing, whether I'm coaching, because that dentist is out of the patients that are there. So I don't want to be grossly off. Like, I don't want to say there's 2,000 patients and there's really only 700. But here's a good tip, I think. I look at numbers is, look at production per patient in a practice. So if you see production per patient as, let's say, $250 per patient, that's a little high, but it's reasonable. If you saw $500 per patient, you know that seller is doing some special stuff. And they don't have a lot of patients. I sold a practice like this recently to a very high-end, it was a very high-end older general dentist. So he was doing big cases on few people. It's a dangerous practice for someone to buy. So active patient count, like between 1,200 and for a solo practice. If you hear way outside of that, something's off. But I found, even if I sell my own practice tomorrow, dialing into the exact number of active patients, it's not the easiest thing to do.
Oh yeah, it's hard. I don't know how many times I've seen a evaluation that says they have like 3,000 active patients and they're doing like $750,000 in revenue.
Yeah. A lot of times it's just those are the amount of people that have come through the practice. But I would tell the buyer, that's still going to be valuable. You can actually reactivate older patients. That older dentist just kind of given up on them. We did an acquisition where we just bought charts, and the guy gave us like 500 physical charts. He had no computer. It was fun. We got people to come back to see us like they hadn't been to the dentist for 4 or 5 years. So, always keep those people on file because you can do some reactivation programs.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I turned my video off because I'm getting some bandwidth issues. I don't know if it's on my end or your end, but that might help a little bit.
No worries.
So, but as far as, having somebody come in and acquiring a practice and being able to have that be, let's assume that someone has found a practice they want and they are into the process of acquiring it, and they're coming to the point where they're about to be the brand new owners of their very own dental practice. To me, this is the area, and I'm assuming this is what a lot that you help with. This is the area that to me is the scariest for these docs, because I had someone ask me the other day, when's the best time for the selling doc to tell the staff that they're selling the practice? Because this is a person who had been tight-lipped. They didn't let them know, and they're like, they need to tell them like a week before or like the night before.
I talked with Rob Montgomery just about you usually have to wait till an asset purchase agreement is signed, and maybe hopefully that's not the closing date, because it's tricky. You're usually not under obligation to hire the staff, and they're not under obligation to work for you. So you don't want to show up the first day and then be so upset that they just leave, right? I think that's happened to some people. Conversely, all of us as dentists, we have team members. Some we think are all-stars, some we think are good, some we think are the person who's just still around there. And that person may not fit with the new seller or the person buying it, so they have to have an opportunity. So that part is very tricky. But I think what you said made a lot of sense there, and it made me think of this. I don't know if anybody would want to do this or how I would make this happen, but someone who's going to buy a practice, they should take a week off of work. I could charge them some type of observation fee. I don't know what it would be. And I tell them, just spend a week with me at my practice, a month before you have to take over yours. And you'll at least be exposed to all the things that happen that you have no idea happen to an owner. So I think that's, it's nobody goes, I use an example. No one goes home and after they have a baby and say, well, maybe we should get a crib now, right? Because the crib's always there ahead of time. But with new practice owning, it's not easy. So they almost need to find an owner that they could shadow. It doesn't always have to be under any sort of consulting thing. Maybe they just go hang out. I mean, if someone want to come and hang out for the day, I can make that happen. But really, and this is my thing, Jonathan, don't watch any of the dental procedures. Just watch everything that happens outside the operatory, outside the owner training, right? Mm-hmm. Because do your clients call you up a lot of times very upset that they can't figure out how to get a crown to fit? Is that one of the main problems that they have?
Not very often. Yeah, it's
right.
It's
usually a people something else, right? Yeah, my assistant is fighting with the other assistant. I didn't know I needed this insurance and this is what it was going to cost. I had no idea. This was how the business aspect. I mean, what you guys do is just phenomenal, and they almost need a little boot camp for that, how to. Even if they're not doing it themselves, they have to be aware of how the money coming in and out of their office works. Insurances are challenging. So it's just, there's so many balls in the air during that transition time that anything that they could do to feel more comfortable is just going to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let me ask you this. What is your thoughts on, analyzing those employees of the practice that you're going to be acquiring? Do you usually find that, I've heard different, rules of thumb. Some people say you don't change anything until 6 months later. Some people say you immediately make changes. What's your?
I think if it's your first, it's all about your first practice versus satellite. If it's your first practice, I would change as little as possible, because you don't know what you're disrupting in a way that could be too risky. Hopefully the seller has given you a heads up. I mean, you did just buy the person's practice. It is dentist to dentist. So I encourage my buyer coaching clients to, whether it's going out to dinner or coffee, to take a piece of paper and say, all right, Sally, tell me about her. What's good about her? What are things that are a problem? And if she might say something like, listen, on Monday mornings, Sally has to get 3 kids to school by 9 o'clock. She barely can get here. Don't go in at 9:01 and ask her why the insurance claims weren't sent out from Friday. And that would be valuable information, right? Mm-hmm. So they really need to dig into each one of those people. But if it's your first practice, I still am not changing much. If you're doing satellite practice purchases, I've had times where we've kept people and it's been a problem. Those are ones where my core living doesn't depend on that practice. So I'm more open to making changes in a quicker manner. Still don't make a lot of changes, but if someone's been in the practice for 40 years and they're only going to be there for another year, that may be the time for them to retire along with the dentist.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, okay. So as far as probably the last question we'll get to is, tell me about,
Sure.
because you have a unique perspective having actually listed practices for sale, as well as helping buyers get into practice ownership. What is your take on the independent broker or the buyer and seller representing broker? Is that a thing?
I'm glad you brought that up. And I purchased 2 practices from a dual representation broker. So dual representation brokers, only dentists could allow this to work. And the only reason they allow it to work is because, to just be 100% honest, sellers are cheap. Because sellers will pay less commission to a dual representation broker than someone like me, just a seller's broker, because they'll pass that commission along to the buyer. To me, I think we should just act like a team dentist. And when you buy a practice, you pay no commission. And when you sell a practice, you pay a commission. It would just be nice if I went to dental schools all over the country and told dentists this is what to expect. But sometimes an older dentist say, I only have to pay 7% instead of 10% commission. But I mean, Rob Montgomery has just become such a close friend and advisor. I say to sellers, a lot of times you have to be careful about who's representing you, right? This is your last sort of hurrah out in the dental space. And you want someone representing you that doesn't have a great reputation. And a lot of dual representation brokers do not, because at the end of the day, they're trying to get deals by in ways that are not necessarily, I shouldn't say not say, that are not really ethical. They say things like, you don't need an attorney to look things over. If you hear a broker say that, you should run away from it. Because I say, as a seller, I say this, I work for the seller, right, when I'm doing this, but I work with the buyer. So when the buyer says, do I need an attorney? I say, of course you need one. It's a big decision for you. I want you to feel good at the end of this. So that's responsible advice, right? Irresponsible advice is, we'll come up with the paperwork. You can just sign it. You don't want to spend money on an attorney. That's really not responsible.
Yeah, I've got these templates that were filled out from a time when somebody else sold a practice, and I mark out the old person's name, put yours in. It's all good.
I'll leave you. We can spend a couple minutes, but there's no such thing as a standard agreement, which is what Rob will say. And I'll tell dentists, there's no such thing as a standard treatment plan. Well, can you just give me your standard treatment plan for me? Or no, I'll give you my standard treatment plan. Is it okay that it has 2 extraction bone grafts and implants on it, right? There's no such thing as that. Each deal, they might have certain components that are similar, but they're structured in their own unique ways.
Absolutely. And they all have their own pitfalls and dangers of ways you can really, really get upset, and so and to be fair to the all those dual representation brokers that are listening right now, I'm sure the thousands, I'm sure that a lot of them, we're not saying that a lot of them are unscrupulous, but a lot of them, even if they're giving their very best advice, if they're giving their very best advice to one person, sometimes that could be the worst advice to the other person.
Yeah, you're right. No, because I know someone, and I don't want to sound too harsh, and we collaborate, or not collaborate, but we connect on different things. But it's just, I don't know why they don't just become sellers brokers, and then everyone can just sort of have their own lane, stay in your own lane. That's just the part I don't totally understand. And I'm someone who bought from a dual rep broker, and it was fine afterwards. And that was one of the ones that wasn't as toxic. It was just a small fee that we had to pay on the buyer side. But I think, you're doing a great job in helping your clients understand this, and hopefully they get to someone like you early enough before they've done. I like when dentists say, I'm about to sign the asset purchase agreement. Should I get some help? I'm like, you needed help like 3 months ago. So.
My tinfoil hat says to me that the reason this has become so prevalent in this industry is because, 20 years ago, I guess maybe, probably I would argue that the probability of success has decreased in that time frame of a successful transition.
I totally agree with you.
And the dual representation brokers, it usually just worked out. It would work out. And
yes. Yeah.
So
it can be very problematic post sale. So I will be happy to come back on for a part 2 sometimes, John. This time went too quickly for me,
Yeah, no kidding.
they are going to come get me out of this room here in a second. But you're doing a great job for the dental community here, and I look forward to listening to this and hearing more. And I'll be happy to be a guest in the future sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Dr. Paul, if you are wanting to be in contact with Dr. Paul or maybe get some help with buying a practice or something like that, what is a good way for them to be able to get a hold of you, Dr. Paul?
Thanks, Jonathan. drpaulgoodman.com is the easiest way. We got a form you can email, talk about some of the things I do. And the dentalamigos.com has our podcast. So I like to promote that one as well. So drpaulgoodman.com or the dentalamigos.com.
Yeah, definitely go to your iTunes right now if you're listening on iTunes and do a search for Dental Amigos so that you can join the Dental Nacho world with Dr. Paul. So fantastic. Well, we will definitely have a part 2 at some point in the near future. And guys, Dr. Paul is a really helpful person who tries a lot and does a lot of good for the dental industry. So if you do me a favor, reach out to him, say thank you for being on today. He's got a busy schedule, and I'd consider that a personal favor for me, guys. So I appreciate you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
This is what you're doing is awesome. Thanks for having me on, and I'll talk again soon.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks, Jonathan. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
So that's it for today's episode, but that doesn't mean that the learning and implementation have to stop there. I've created a free report called The 15 Numbers That Will Make or Break Your Dental Practice. This report has been downloaded over 1,000 times by dental professionals. So if you want your free copy of this report that's going to outline what the most important numbers are in any dental practice, and it also includes how to look at your numbers, how to set goals, has a whole slew of really important information that is the culmination of all of my experience as a dental CPA, then just go to startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. That is startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. And so that's it for today, Ambitious Dentist. Again, I'm Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV. I'll see you next week with another world-class practice owner or consultant that will help you start your very own dental practice.